API is the most common data source, and among the API, REST API is most generally used API. As we know, API are the set of rules and instructions which client and the server follows when they are doing the communication. Now we talk about the client. Client is the end user. And API works to the server. I am repeating, API works to the server. API is hosting on the server. So there can be multiple clients for each API. You can assume it as the server as the engine of the train, and there are multiple coaches attached with the same server. There can be thousands of clients associated with one API, and the communication between them is directed by the API. There are certain rules and regulations. Now we talk about the major principles which API follows. First one is the layered system. When we talk about this, then in the backend we do have the URL, some URL. For example, the URL is abc.com. This is the API URL. But you don't need to show this actual URL always. Now you can have the between layer. For example, you are masking this URL with this URL with this custom URL. So what is the benefit of doing this? Many people will be thinking, why we are applying this step? Why we are adding the extra layer? It will help you. For example, due to some XYZ reason, this URL has to be migrated or it is inactive. So if you want to change this URL, then only you have to update the value of this URL with another URL. For example, here abc2. This is the updated URL. And your client knows this URL XYZ1. So there will be no problem for the client. Else, if there is no layer, then you have to notify each of the client. And if there are thousands of clients, then you have to notify each of the client that yes, your URL has been changed. But now if there is extra layer, then there is no impact. You don't need to notify any of the person, because your architecture is not affected by the URL or the server IP change. That is the benefit of the layered system. These are the small points which we need to keep in the mind, because it makes the difference in the theoretical concepts and in the practical concepts. This is the most practical concepts, layered system. We will talk this about it in the later modules, how we achieve this. Usually we achieve this to the AWS or the Azure. There are API gateways available there. Through that we can mask the actual host. Now second one is, before jumping into this, let's make the diagram of the client. And the server. Now the communication between them happens to the API, you all know. Now what's the output of the server and what we give to the server should be standardized. It is standardized in the form of JSON or XML. This is the format which we give to the server or we take from the server as a response. This standardization helps in maintaining the API pipeline effectively. Now uniform interface. In uniform interface, we have some certain type of methods which we have discussed in the earlier classes. What are those methods? Get, post, put, patch, delete. These are the 5 methods which are common to all the APIs. It doesn't depend on the API systems. It is common for all. And the same format. Format is also common, in which they will return the data or receive the data. It is common for both. These methods are common for all the API structures. And the response are also standardized. As we discussed this in the earlier principle, the response are also standardized. Now client-server architecture. This is the client and server architecture. I hope you are clear with this. Statelessness. This is the major part. Whenever you hit the API, every time we require to give all the parameters. In fact, authentication also. API doesn't recognize you. Even within a second you made the second hit, it requires your authentication every time. So API, this makes this the quite secure system. This makes the API quite secure. Every time you have to give the parameters and everything. Catchable. Some APIs, not all APIs, allow you to catch your response, so that every time you don't need to request the server for the response. If the request is being repeated, then it can be catchable. It can be stored on the intermediate server where you don't need to request the actual server, and it will decrease the load from the actual server. So these are the 5 principles which we have talked about. Thank you. For notes, you can follow the descriptions, and there I have given the GitHub repository link. There you can download the notes.